Hello, welcome to Time to Say Goodbye. It is the 29th of May, and this is a special episode because Tyler, this is the first episode. This show, I don't know how many episodes we're at actually. For a while, we would number them, but it's like 150 or something episodes. It might be more than that, but this is the first one where we are putting it on YouTube and that the listeners can actually see my face, see your face, see the rooms in which we are broadcasting the show from. And the reason why we did this is just because we've gotten some requests to do this, but also because I think that, I don't know, honestly, it's like it seems like everyone has to do it now. I kind of am a
Compulsory
fan
video.
yeah, exactly. We're pivoting to video, but we're trying to do it in a very low impact type of way. And so, yeah, you're going to be able to watch this show as well, which I think is nice. What books do you have in the background? I think we should do a little bit of, we don't
Oh
have to do the
God.
room raider thing, right?
Uh
But we can do a little bit of a
yeah, so I
tour of our
have
places.
like a bunch of comic books, like a lot of Alan Moore stuff. I kind of dabble in the history of the American right. I have since grad school as part of a working group on the American right, just sort of studying the history of the right post Trump. So I have like a ton of right wing books that I had for that research that I don't want to put in my work office.
Ah.
So those are behind here. Yeah, that's and then like a bunch of other stuff, like a lot of Cormac McCarthy and Hemingway and stuff I
Yeah,
like to have at home.
I don't have anything in the background. I have a Free Darko poster
Nice.
of Charles Barkley from my friend Jacob. He's one of the more talented illustrators I've ever met. And then one of our users actually made the poster of Karl Marx in the podcast
Oh, that's awesome.
with the list of our podcast. That's about it. And then I don't know, you
That's
see
good.
like some stuff I don't ever use. This is my basement, but okay, that's enough of that. All right, let's get into the show here, which is that we had some sad news this week, and I want to go over it, which is that Bill Walton, um, the one of the great basketball players of all time, and a sort of, I don't know, bon vivant, I think is the right word, right? Somebody who was beloved for his own outsized love of life and the Grateful Dead, and his enthusiasm for everything, and generally a generous spirit, passed away at the age of 71 of cancer. I think it was quite unexpected. I mean, I think that listeners to the show or anyone who knows me knows that I follow the NBA quite closely. I didn't realize that Bill Walton was so sick. And I think that maybe it was something that was private. And I want to play, for those of you who don't know, and also those of you who just want to reminisce, I want to play what I think is one of his great moments here on the show. All right.
And when you look at Boris Dio, what he's done to this franchise, has changed everything. And as we celebrate his brilliance, and when you talk to Boris Dio, what a classical human being he is. It was 201 years ago today. Yeah. That Beethoven's Symphony Number 3 in E flat, which escorted in the age of romanticism in music. And when I look at Boris Dio, I think of Beethoven and the age of the Romantics. This guy has got it all.
Okay, so that is Bill Walton talking about Boris Diaw. I thought about this clip for a while. I think that he's actually somewhat right, because what Boris Diaw was that Boris Diaw was this sort of overweight French player, right? He was about 6'9". He was on the Spurs and he was on the Suns. And what he did was that he was this beautiful passer at his size, right? And he could also handle the ball a little bit and he could shoot from outside. But he didn't really have like the athletic big man skills, right? That one associates with the NBA, and like a 6'9" powerful guy like Amari Stoudemire, Sean Kemp, or something like that, who jumps out of the gym, dunks on everybody. Diaw was, actually closer to Jokic, and the way that NBA stars are right now, like Luka, whatever, a guy who can pass with a lot of size. And so actually Bill Walton, I think, was quite right? Like he was just like a few years, he's a few years ahead of his time. But yeah, Bill Walton, the guy who did a lot of, I don't know, were you familiar at all with him, Tyler? I know you're not the biggest
I
NBA
knew
fan.
about him. I don't follow basketball super seriously, but I knew about him in the context of him being like an athlete who was also involved in like activism and stuff. I didn't know that he was a deadhead. That's cool.
Yeah, he's like the biggest deadhead, and he would just like go to these shows And the entire show, he would just put his arms up in the air. I can do this because we're on YouTube now. He would just put his arms in the air up like this, which is funny because he's 7'1".
gigantic.
Can you imagine being behind him at shows? Anyway, there are all these people who have testimonies of being behind him at a show, and they're like, it was really annoying, but then he was such a cool guy that it ended up being cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, he's a guy who is known for his activism. Sadly, later in his life, he took a I don't know. It's like one of these things where you don't even want to bring it up because the man just died. But he did. I think that some of our listeners will bring it up rightfully, which is that he became a bit of an anti-homeless activist in San Francisco. Not a bit, like pretty shockingly. Like he wrote an op-ed that said that they should round up the homeless and put them in a work camp outside of the city limits, which, it was rough to read. It was surprising to read, but one lives 71 years and puts together a life
weird
for a
when
reason.
They get old, man.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, you mention it, but I don't think it takes away from the activism of his youth. But the reason why I bring it up is because I wanted to discuss something that I thought about this morning, which is that, the NBA in 2020 did this whole thing about the bubble and George Floyd, Black Lives Matter. They put it on every single piece of paraphernalia and every bit of real estate they had inside of the NBA bubble. In a lot of ways, in retrospect, it seems quite obvious that this was a way to placate the players who didn't really want to be there. A lot of them were at least very interested in the protests. They wanted to participate, and the NBA needed to capitulate in some sort of way. And they just said, what if we just put Black Lives Matter everywhere? We have Nike print a bunch of jerseys that have slogans on the back. And the slogans can vary from like incredibly important phrases like I am a man, right? Like in the civil rights movement, that is one of the most
iconic,
sacred phrases of the civil rights movement, to like something like education reform, which is like what one of the white, kind of racist players wore, and so, and man, I was just thinking about how bad that looks right now, and like the idea of sports and politics. So yeah, this is something we haven't discussed, but I just want to get your general take on this. Like, do you actually think that sports and politics, like, do you think it matters, right? Like, is this an actual site for politics, or is this something that we overblow?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think it's I think it depends on the sport. Like, I'm not a sports historian, but I do feel like there are sports, or there are like athletes historically who were really political. Like, I mean, Muhammad Ali or whatever. I think there are sports that seem to have like more of a direct history of politics. I mean, I mainly follow the NFL, and one thing that I think is interesting about the NFL is that, of course, there have always been NFL players that are interested in activism, but there's also something kind of like bipartisan about the NFL. One of the like more thoughtful articles I read in the wake of the Colin Kaepernick stuff was neither for or against Colin Kaepernick, but was just pointing out that like at a macro level, this is sort of the decline of the notion of the NFL as like one of the last bastions of American society where like across the political spectrum, people all can like enjoy this thing, and it's like a lingua franca we all have. And so, I do think it's been interesting watching that change in the last couple of years as the NFL's got more outwardly political, which from my point of view, I think is neither here nor there. I mean, I think the NFL does, particularly players, like many of them have really important foundations that do really good work in their communities, that I think is like real and substantive,
Right.
but at the same time, I think NFL, like the NBA, is like very invested in sort of, performative anti-racism that is completely friendly with their sort of basic corporate model. My favorite thing in the last couple months, the NFL released social justice hats as part of their social justice hat collection.
Wait, what? I didn't even know about this.
Yeah,
Wait,
dude.
hold
Yeah,
on.
yeah. Look
I'm
it up.
gonna Google it right now.
Social justice hats. I don't know. Are you a Niners fan? I don't know who your team is.
I just saw it. Oh my god.
Yeah, I'm gonna buy you one.
Okay,
just tell
so
me who
it
your
looks
team
like
is.
okay, I'm looking at a Texans one, and it says Justice Equity. It's a beanie, and then there's like fitted hats that are the normal hat, but in the background, it's almost like the Trump ad. The one that said the Reich, where the background was all
yeah. One of those says like police reform or some shit.
It's equity, opportunity. No, police reform would actually be too far for them. It says economic something. Oh my god, yeah. I mean, the community. community relations. What does that mean? Oh man, I didn't realize they put out these hats. Yeah,
Yeah, dude.
okay.
And then the
Are
end
you
racism
getting
thing is
one?
iconic, of course, the
Yeah.
little helmet end racism, But I mean, I think it's a mix. I think I'm like cynical about the NFL at like a macro level and their social justice initiatives, but I do think there are lots of players and organizations that do really important community work that is not, as much as I love being cynical, I mean, at the, individual player level, I think there's a lot of good stuff happening.
Yeah, I think that over cynicism about this stuff is wrong, because I do think that the sincerity is real. I also think I think it's useful, but I think it's unfair to compare today's players with something like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right?
Hmm.
Or Muhammad Ali. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I spent some time with Kareem. I think I've talked about it on the show before, but he's still the most fascinating person I've ever been around. Um, where I just wanted, I don't know if fascinating is the right word. He's the person where I wanted to get in his head the most. Like, I wanted to know what goes on in there, because, at some level, he was such an asshole, right? Not just to me, but to like kids that would come up to him and stuff. And that's what he's famous for, right? He's famous for being prickly. But when you see it in action, it's just like, bro, I actually don't understand why you have to be this way. It's like a dad and his 8-year-old kid, and what the dad said to you is, that's one of the greatest basketball players who ever lived. He didn't even ask for a photo. And it's like, and and Kareem looks like the man has like insulted him in some sort of way. And I was just like, look, there's all these apologists and people being like, oh, but look, there's 50 years of history documenting this stuff with him. And yet sits out the Olympics, right? He, after his freshman year in UCLA, where he is still the most famous basketball player in the world because of what he did in high school. His job is to be an intern at a Harlem newspaper during the riots, right? I think 68. And he like runs around Harlem with like a reporter's notebook. 7'1", right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
or 7'4", one of the most famous like figures on earth. Somebody you actually cannot, and this is the other thing that I found with him, which is like, he can't hide, and that sucks, right?
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
you
Yeah.
can't hide when you're 7'4". If you're Leonardo DiCaprio, you can put on like a fake nose and a hat and sunglasses, and you can go get breakfast or something. But he can't hide, and so I don't know. I think that it's unfair to compare them to today, but then that also, of course, offers up the question, well, are we just in a less political moment now, right? Like,
Yeah.
do we expect less of the athletes if we can say it's not fair to compare them? It's like, well, then what does that say about this moment? And I think all of that is true. I just found it really interesting to think about, where the NBA was, because they basically did all this and then they tried to memory hole and make everyone forget that it ever happened. I just
Yeah,
find
yeah,
that to
yeah.
be weird. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of that. And this isn't just like the NBA or sports in general. I think there's like a lot of memory holding that happens. And then people get irritated. Like the people who did the thing then get irritated if you bring it up. Or you're like, hey, do you remember when you guys did this whole thing? And they're like, why are you bringing that up? Like, and it's like, well, you did it. Like people are pointing it out because you did this thing. Like, you don't then just get to be like, oh, we've moved on now. I think there's like in general about like a lot of the stuff that happened in 2020 that like either wasn't very effective or like was weird. People now just like don't want to talk about it, but it's like, you guys did this. Like, you don't get a pick when it gets memory hold.
The weird thing about the NBA and that type of stuff is that the NBA has like sort of coven. I don't know what the right word is, but it has a small group of defenders that are basically like Taylor Swift stands, where they'll defend the NBA on anything. And I don't actually understand what their incentive is, because I understand it when it's like a team that you're a fan of, but I
Yeah,
really
yeah,
don't
yeah.
understand it when it's like,
The
oh,
corporation.
we are just big fans of the NBA and its social justice initiatives. And, the way that the argument, the trump card that they always use is that, well, the NFL is much worse. The NFL is much, much worse, which like, I don't even think at this point is true. Right.
Yeah.
Like, so like, I don't know. We sort of looked through some of the social justice stuff that the NFL, NBA are doing. What is the NFL actually doing? Because they have this big fund that they did after 2020 kind of try and make amends, I think, for Kaepernick as well, where they started this like coalition. So what does that coalition do?
Yeah, so they have a certain amount of money that I think is available to each team or most teams or teams who want it. But I think the total amount was not very high. I don't think it was 5 million per team. I think it was like 5 million collectively have been spent, but maybe it was 5 million per team. But regardless, I mean, the teams themselves seem to do good things with it. Like one I was looking at was about sort of working on getting people who are on life sentences off life sentences, and they had gotten, I think, 16 men in Alabama, I think it is, off of life sentences. And that's just like a huge thing that like really matters and makes a difference in people's lives. So I do think like at the level of, I think it's simultaneously right to roll your eyes about the motivations of the NFL that really does just want to slap a smiley face on, the fact that it is this giant business that presides over men who are smashing their brains into one another and getting CTE, and then, not giving them lifelong insurance and disability care and everything else. But on the other hand, I think, there are really good things that these initiatives seem to be doing. And I think that's always been the case. I mean, it feels a little bit like it's just funneling some extra money into things that have always been happening on NFL teams. I mean, many of them do community work. Many of them have been involved in, social justice issues and organizations and local activism. But yeah, there's definitely good stuff that's happening. It seems to me that a lot of it is centered around prison reform, which I think is, one of these things that's like relatively bipartisan, where there are plenty of people
Right.
on both the left and right. I mean, that was one of the things that Trump even was involved in, to his minor credit, right? Like, I think most people on the left and right can agree, like, even if the police might be a politically hot button issue, like people agree that too many people are in prison for ridiculous things or should not be serving sentences for life for something they did at the age of 18 or whatever.
Yeah,
So
Trump did that with
was it Kardashians or some shit? I can't. Everything now is such a
but
fog
it was
from,
somewhat linked to the Kardashians, but it was sort of the way that was how Lil Wayne kind of justified voting for Trump.
Yeah.
The NBA, by contrast, has every year names somebody the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar Social Justice Champion of the Year. It's like part of their postseason awards. This year is Karl Anthony Towns. And then they have a whole page called the NBA National Basketball Social Justice Coalition. And I would just say, man, they have to hire somebody to update this, even if it's updated with crap, because like they post like 3 things a year. And one of them is something like
hats.
Doc Rivers is working with the Pennsylvania Innocence Project, which is, great.
Yeah.
But then the other stuff is just like, hate is on the rise in America as NBA leaders were fighting it together, which is like not anything. It's just like, we should stop hate. And a lot of their stuff is around voting, right? That's sort of how they decided to go with it, which every election day, they don't play games. They just use the NBA sites as voting polling places. So you can go, I don't know, if you live in Brooklyn or something, you go to Barclays and vote there. I don't know. I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's important in some ways, but obviously it is different than 2020 when they're having all the people kneel for the national anthem.
Yeah.
And sort of reappropriating just like the most important parts of the civil rights movement. And then you had all these people saying like, this is the new civil rights movement. And look, if you felt that way at the time, and I don't want to like say, look, we all know why this isn't working and it's quite obvious, but I think it's good to point out when the obvious thing happens, right? Like, which is kind of where we're at right now, with all of this. Who do you think, who in the NFL do you think like does this right? Who do you think is somebody who you think is a thoughtful and,
I do think the like Pittsburgh Steelers organization in general. I mean, I think the Rooney Rule comes from people affiliated with the Rooney Rule. If for folks who don't know, is a rule that requires every NFL team to at least interview several black coaches as part of the process, as a way to redress the sort of real absence of black head coaches in the NFL. And there are different ways people game the Rooney Rule or whatever else, but just across the board, I think Pittsburgh does, as an organization, is really seems to be quite thoughtful. I mean, I think part of that is also Mike Tomlin, I think, is really good on a lot of social justice stuff in a way that is entirely like no BS and not performative. But I think that organization in general is one I always, even as a lifelong Eagles fan, is one that I think does things mostly, the right way and seems pretty buttoned up, and also kind of at the forefront of pushing for some changes in a way that feels sincere and not, driven by just cynicism.
What did you think about the kicker, Harrison Butker?
Oh
Did you catch any
God,
of that?
yeah,
That was like it
Handmaid's
was
Tale Harrison, yeah,
yeah, yeah, Millsdale Harrison.
dude,
Also like raving anti-Semite Harrison Butker.
totally.
I mean, the him saying like just randomly, and also why can't we talk anymore about who killed the Jew or who killed Jesus? And I was just like, whoa,
Totally
whoa, where did
wild,
that come
dude.
from, dude? Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
no, that shit's so insane. I mean, I understand it was like, some people, like the more reasonable people, like not quite defending the speech, but contextualizing, were like, well, it was like a Catholic university, and like obviously their commencement speeches are going to sound different. But that was like way beyond the pale. It wasn't just like, even something about like abortion or like, whatever that is like a standard issue, like Catholic talking point. It was like wildly misogynistic. Yeah, I mean,
I know.
I said
The nuns
online,
who
and I believe
invited
this, we
him
should have stopped
actually.
bullying kickers. I think kickers have gotten too big for their britches. I think we should have kept bullying them. They think they're real NFL players now, and they do that.
Yeah, like Pat McAfee becoming like the most famous
Yeah,
NFL
yeah, yeah.
or like ex NFL media figure, maybe embolden Harrison Butker to be like, maybe I
Exactly.
could be
Yeah.
like the right wing version of
Pat
Pat
McAfee.
McAfee,
Yeah, yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. Yeah, my theory about that one is that like he didn't tell them what the speech was about,
Mm.
and that they thought he was going to do something like, as an NFL kicker, there's a lot of pressure on you, but that is the importance of preparation. And in your lives going forward, there's going to be a lot of pressures on you as well. It might not be 60,000 fans screaming that they want you dead, but there will be something like that in your life. And what you need to do is you need to refocus, something like that,
Yeah,
right?
kick your dreams
But
through the
instead,
upright.
he's like,
Yeah.
all you women go back in the kitchen. And they're like,
What the
holy
fuck? Can you
shit.
imagine if you're I have to do some stuff at work, where I invite speakers to campus and shit like that. And I cannot imagine if you booked Harrison Butker and then he just starts going off on this. I mean,
Yeah.
you'd just be dying. I mean,
Yeah. His like
oh,
his speaker profile, I bet, from his speaker agency doesn't say like, you know, ask
trad life.
provocative questions like, why can't we talk about who killed Jesus? It's just like, as a man of faith, right? And
Yeah.
and a two-time Super Bowl champion, or however many Super Bowls he's won,
Oh, God.
and then he just flies out with that. I don't know. It's super crazy. All right, let's hit this transition. I want you to listen to something. All right, let's all listen to this together.
Well, that's my commitment to you, to show you democracy is still the way. If black men are being killed in the street, we bear witness. For me, that means to call out the poison of white supremacy, to root out systemic racism. I stood up for George Floyd's family to help create a country. We don't need to have that talk with your son or grandson as they get pulled over. Instead of a trail of broken promises, we're investing more money than ever in black families and black communities. We're reconnecting black neighborhoods cut off by old highways and decades of disinvestment when no one cared about the community. We've delivered checks in pockets to reduce black child poverty, the lowest rate in history. Removing every lead pipe in America so every child can drink clean water without fear of brain damage and can't afford to remove the lead pipes themselves. We're delivering affordable high-speed internet so no child has to sit in a parent's car or do their homework in a parking lot outside of McDonald's. Instead of forcing you to prove you're 10 times better, we're breaking down doors so you have 100 times more opportunity. Good paying jobs you can raise a family on in your neighborhood. Capital to start small business and loans to buy homes. Health insurance, prescription drugs, housing that's more affordable and accessible. I walked the picket line and defended the rights of workers. I'm relieving the burden of student debt. Many of you have already had the benefit of it, so I can chase your dreams and grow the economy. When the Supreme Court told me I couldn't, I found two other ways to do it. And we were able to do it because it grows the economy. And I, in addition to the original $7 billion investment in HBCUs, I'm investing $16 billion more in our history.
All right, that was Joe Biden at Morehouse College. Todd, why don't you set up this clip? Like you sent it, and what did you want to talk about it for?
Yeah, I mean, I just think this is the we've talked a bit about on the show about the trends of minorities, Hispanic and Black Americans in particular, turning toward Trump. Hispanics sort of on a greater percentage basis, Black Americans, roughly around 20% according to polling, even though people dispute those polls. But we haven't really talked about like what Biden's sales pitch to the Black community looks like, and how the campaign is trying to address this. And this seemed to me, the choice to give a commencement at Morehouse was really deliberate. In this commencement speech, he also called for a ceasefire in Gaza, which, has yet to happen. Maybe by the time the episode airs, who knows? But so far, not so much. But this seems to be his like sales pitch to the Black community, this commencement. And then this snippet in particular sort of, outlines what his, why, Black folks should vote for Biden. And yet it just seems to me to be rambling and incoherent. Democracy kills me every time I listen to it. I don't know. It's unclear to me at all that his campaign is making any kind of case for Black voters that is persuasive, or that folks are likely to find persuasive, or at least more specifically, like the unpersuaded are likely to find persuasive. And yeah, I don't know what the plan is here. I mean, I don't know. What did you think of this?
Well, let's break down what he said point by point, right? The first, and I agree with you that he has seen the polling. He understands it's a huge problem because of the margins in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, right? Which is basically like if Detroit, other parts of Michigan, Milwaukee, basically, and then Philadelphia don't show up. If the Black vote doesn't show up in those states, it becomes much harder for him to win, right? It's the same problem that Robbie Mook or whoever outlined with the Hillary Clinton program. We've talked about it on the show before. And so he's starting his response, right? How is he going to get this vote back if the polls are real, right? Even though his response seems to be the polls aren't real, but obviously this shows that he thinks that some of the polls are real. Yeah. But point by point, the first point, I think one of the things that he said was that, and I think it's the one part that got the most applause was about student loan debt relief, unemployment, economic issues. It seems like there was at least some muted applause. I don't want to make too much of it, but that was one part of the appeal, right? The second part, I think, was this sort of what you identified as pablum about, a sort of string of cliches. What the talk? I don't think you guys should have the talk, right? That's one thing he said, right? He also said that there's killing in the streets, right? Because of white supremacy, right? He said the word white supremacy, which I was actually somewhat surprised by the fact that he stated that word. But yeah, I don't know. I would agree with you. It felt like half of the speech was like something that he dusted off from 2020, 2021. And the other half of it was, I think better, which is just sort of, this is what I've done. Yeah. And, student debt relief, putting money in the pockets of families for childcare, stuff like that type of stuff, I think could be convincing. But I don't know. I think that for now, it's just kind of like cliches and the record, right? And the cliches I don't think go over particularly well. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think the cliches go over particularly well. I especially don't. I mean, there's this basic contradiction is perhaps not the right word, but I'll call it a contradiction, where it seems like Biden was using the Morehouse speech to address the Black community in America as such at this moment, when his polling with that demographic is not going as well as he hoped. And yet he's addressing the sort of part of the Black coalition, sort of college-educated Black Americans that I think are I would bet that is not the part of the Black vote that is peeling off of Biden, would be my guess. And so there is on the one hand this like pablum and preaching to the choir feeling about like democracy and so on, but also, I mean, even the college loan stuff, which obviously I support college debt relief. I think college should be free. But on the other hand, like it seems that polls are suggesting that the minorities who are peeling off are on the are people who follow the news less, are lower information voters just in terms of like how much they're paying into the attention to the election and so on, and less educated. And I think
and lower propensity voters, right?
And lower propensity voters. And I just don't
yeah.
think like again, college debt relief is great, but like I don't think that is reaching the voters he needs to reach, which are folks that are lower propensity voters, lower income, Black men who are often underemployed. So I don't know, it feels just very unstrategic. Like it doesn't feel like there's a plan. It feels like they're just shotgunning stuff at the wall and hoping some pellets hit something useful.
In 2020, what there was this response, right? And it was that basically the Democrats could say that George Floyd happened because Donald Trump was in office and because of white supremacy, and white supremacy was on the rise. And that you had all this you didn't really have a strong statement against the police or like an adoption of abolition or defund or whatever. But you had like these sort of kind of almost punty, as in like they were punting, even though they wanted to say it, but also kind of, or at least ideologically confused messaging, where I remember at the DNC, for example, which obviously was all virtual at that point, right? And it was kind of like a PowerPoint presentation. And the messaging was basically, we have to take crime seriously, and, there's some bad apples, and, but look, I hear you. I feel your pain. And I would say that the 2020 Joe Biden was actually quite good at doing the I feel your pain part, right? Like, I mean, there are
totally
town halls and stuff like that where he would just be like, me. Do you remember that moment from 2020 in the election where it's like, me? And it works because we do know him. We've known him forever. Right? He also was vice president for Obama, who's wildly popular amongst the Black electorate. And so all that has kind of gone away. I imagine that what they are doing is they are desperately trying to get Obama to come out and fix this problem for them. Obama has actually come out a little more in public recently. And so I think that he's going to do a little bit. But if the past is any indication, I don't think he's going to really he's not going to go around stumping for Biden, right? Because he didn't do it before. And so I don't know. It's a little bit difficult. Like, I think that their only hope in doing this is getting the Obamas, right? Because Michelle could also do it to try and do this for them. But I don't know if Barack and Michelle really have a message either. I just think that their presence would be helpful, right? There's another part that the Biden administration is going to turn to, and I want to play this. This is a attack ad that they put out as an appeal to Black voters. All right, let's listen to this because I know that you love this in particular. I want you to respond to it.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
Of course I hate these people.
Donald Trump disrespecting Black folk is nothing new. He was sued for refusing to rent his apartments to Black families and called for the execution of 5 innocent Black and brown teenagers.
And it's more than anger, it's hatred.
It's why Trump stood with violent white supremacists, warned of a bloodbath if he loses the next election, and if he's president again, vowed to be a dictator who wants revenge on his enemies. Who do you think that is?
Of course I hate these people.
Okay. What did you think?
It's so good. I mean, I just, oh my God. I like, why are we still talking about the Central Park 5? Like, it's been so, like, that is such an evil and shitty part of like Trump's biography among many evil and shitty parts. But it is like, we are stuck in like this vacuum, this time vacuum that we have not left since 2016, where we are just relitigating the same sort of paranoia over and over and over again. But yeah, I don't know. There is just this persistent, like, the Democrats love fantasizing about minorities in the camps. And we've like said this before on the show, but it happens it just suffuses every sort of mainstream democratic piece of messaging, is that if you minorities don't shape up, Trump's going to send you to the camps. It's like a weird fetish they have for like this particular kind of marketing to minorities. And I don't know who obviously people don't find it convincing, because I mean, Hispanics, I think, are around 50% for Trump. Like, obviously, they're not convinced by the camp narrative. I mean, this is one of those
Or
things.
they want to send undocumented people to
right.
Like,
That's
I mean,
possible.
like that's part. That's a large part of it, which is that there's a large anti-immigrant or
sentiment among immigrants.
undocumented immigrant sentiment amongst legal immigrants, right? I mean, I don't know. You just have to know 3 of them, and I bet 2 of them probably feel that way. So,
I don't know. This is for white people kind of too. I mean, this is how I feel about a lot of social justice stuff in general. But like the like official or explicit audience for this is like minorities, right? That he's going to round us all up. But the real audience for this is white people who are, as you point out, are like worried about their neighbors. And I think like the wine mom audience is who this messaging actually like
maybe
reaches.
That's who it's the most effective for. I don't think that it's intended for that. I just think that the people who make these ads are kind of clueless in some sort of way, and that they probably
but I think that's who resonates with it.
Right. They only really know how to talk to the wine moms because they're from the suburbs, and they're like generally upper middle class, very well educated, people who have just been around the sort of striving classes and quasi elites. Not the, we've talked about that this is sort of the political class, right? The political consultant class. What Chuck Rocha, who is the guy who headed up T.O. Burney, right? He always called it the woke white consultant problem in the Democrat Party, is true.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know. I think that I don't know if reminding people that Donald Trump is racist is really that. And then I do kind of agree with you that if the example that you can come up with that he hates black people specifically is from the Central Park Five, that like, don't we have any other?
I mean, I'm sure he does. Like, I'm sure he's
no,
racist.
there's no question he does. He's a horrific racist.
Also, I'm not sure that people care. Like, I'm not sure that the minorities who are voting for Trump are unaware that he's racist.
Oh yeah,
like,
no. They don't.
Like, I just don't think they care.
Right. And that's there's that similar thing where they feel like if you're a minority, then you can't be racist against other minorities or even internally racist. It's like, listen, man, again, meet 3 minorities, and then you'll find.
Did you see the Fox News? I think it was Fox News clip. They interviewed some guy who came across the border. I think he was Eastern European. He's not a Mexican guy, but he comes across the border and they interview him about illegal immigration. And he's like, yeah, this is, a real problem. Like, we should be, like he's in the country for 2 seconds and already he's like worried about other immigrants.
Well, the migrant, look, I think that Democrats have done, and the sort of liberal press have done a poor job covering the migrant crisis, because it seems to be a much bigger problem for most people, including most of the people, many of the people who are concerned about, who are minorities who are swinging towards Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Like, their number one issue is the migrant crisis. Tammy, actually, our beloved Tammy on the show, she wrote a piece in the New Yorker where she went to one of these Trump rallies, and she found that most of the people who are not white are, really concerned about the migrant crisis. It's the thing they keep talking about. Overwhelmingly so, right? It's not like Trump's a G. That was sort of that's like the Lil Wayne thing, right? That got so much pushback. And it's not even really like destabilizing. We want to overthrow the government, and we are dissatisfied with every part of the American establishment. It's just that it seems like a lot of people are really concerned about the migrant thing, and that it's something that Biden doesn't talk about very much, or at least he does so, but it's more like a kind of like, we've got this under control type of thing, and it seems like nobody really believes him.
Isn't he just doing the Trump policies basically on immigration as well? Like, he hasn't really changed much, right? He hasn't they haven't softened a ton.
I think they've softened a little bit in terms of some of the more
like
cruel policies, but there's still some cruel policies out there. Let's just put it that way. And that people who point out that Obama was also awful on immigration in terms of human rights stance are correct, right? Like, and deportations, like, that's not debatable. It's not something that it's just like these things happened and we should think about them in that sort of way. Did he use the same rhetoric that Trump did? No. But, does the rhetoric matter? Sure. But it's not everything. Right. So, the other thing that Biden did was that on the anniversary of George Floyd's death, he tweeted, "George Floyd should be alive. He deserves so much more. Today, I join all those who loved him and all those touched by the civil rights movement he inspired." That's interesting wording. In remembering the tragedy and justice of his death, he changed the world. Now let's act in his memory. Tyler, what do you think about this? Do you think that George Floyd 4 years later carries political currency in the same way for Black voters?
No. No, I don't. And I think I don't think it carries much currency. I don't think George Floyd carries much currency with any voters at this moment. And I think it's for different reasons. I think, I think a lot of Black folks rightly have seen that, corporations and academia and everywhere else did all of these like big, diversity hubbubaloo, and, Amazon and everywhere else hired all these diversity czars and so on and so forth. And then have like quietly and systematically spent the last 2 years like firing them and like divesting from all their diversity initiatives, so I think like there's a lot of sort of Black and brown folks who are like sick of the George Floyd, like sick of politicians and corporations and so on prattling on about George Floyd because they've like seen how empty that rhetoric has become, and then I think there's like another set of voters who, including voters who are Democrats, who see the so-called, summer of racial reckoning and the George Floyd moment as just like part of this trend of performative progressivism and all its excesses that we are now sort of squirming out of at the very moment. And so I don't know who this is for. I mean, maybe you have to say something. I don't know. Glenn Lowry hilariously tweeted, "Was this paid for by the Trump campaign?" Which I thought was funny, which is like a reaction actually some other progressive people also had. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess you just have to do it. Maybe a lot of universities they saw also issued like a 4 years ago on this day kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe some people it appeals to, but I don't know who.
Yeah, I mean, the idea, the people pointed this out, right? But it is strange to give a talk about civil rights and activism and the importance of George Floyd and what happened in the United States in 2020, while also saying that pro-Palestine protesters are, basically going right up to the line of calling them terrorists, right? Mm-hmm. And then saying that they're disruptive and that, they don't know what they're saying, and really, really using charged rhetoric that would not be used against the 2020 protesters. Let's put it that way, right? Yep. Now, you can argue that the reason why he's saying that is because it's true or whatever, right? We don't have to get into that type of argument. But the conflict is there, right? Like, the conflict is that basically, how do you champion what you did and what you believed in 2020 if you feel like that is a key to unlocking more of the Black vote, when you're also going around kind of telling protesters to stop in this moment in a issue that the majority of Democrats, right, disagree with the president on, right? Yep. Like, that's the problem. If it was like 90-10, people thought that Biden was doing a great job and these protesters were silly, then it would be one thing, right? But it's not. I don't know how many people think that protests are silly. I imagine that it's a large percentage of America because America hates protesters. But I would think that at least if you ask them, well, are they wrong to protest? Is the issue that they're protesting illegitimate? Then a lot of them would say, no, it's a legitimate question. I just don't like protesters. That's probably what a lot of people would say.
Right. Yep.
But so yeah, I think it creates this problem for him. And I just don't know. Like, I'm with you. I don't want to bag. I mean, it's not like I get self-conscious sometimes because I feel like bagging too much on Biden in itself is like its own performance, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But man, that speech, the Morehouse speech, if it is his template on his sort of deal with a Black voter, he's got to go back. he's got to go back and workshop that shit a little bit. I don't know what it was supposed to do. And, the response has been like, I don't know. It basically flopped, right? Like, I mean,
Totally.
were there people who were like cheering this on? I don't know. I wasn't paying that much attention to what the response was. Was
No, I think
anybody
it was a
cheering this on?
flop. I mean, I think even the audience was, I mean, I listened to the whole thing and it is painful. Like there are just these long stretches of silence where nobody claps. A lot of students were protesting because of Gaza. It just like really was not seemingly well received. Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know who, again, I don't know who this is for. I think there's this online narrative that comes from centrists that like people like you and I on the left want Trump to win, and that we have this like, left wing death drive that just like blow it all up. And I really want Biden to win. Like I would
me
really
too.
prefer if Biden won the presidency. And so my deep frustration is born out of like preferring that particular scenario and just the degree of incompetence. I mean, it just feels like, it feels like a friend who doesn't know any black people. Like that's like what it feels like when I hear them talk, where it's like, who told you this was like a good way to approach this set of messaging? And I think you're right. He has no moral credibility because of Gaza. I think you're 100% right that like a lot of Americans, including progressive Americans, roll their eyes at protesters and think they're silly or dumb or whatever. But I also think absolutely most voters do think there's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza where the Israeli
Most Democrat
military,
voters.
is brutalizing Palestinians. And so he just doesn't have much moral credibility when, you're seeing images of beheaded Palestinian children and then he's prattling on about George Floyd. I mean, it just does not pass the smell test,
Yeah, I think that like I find the campaign ad to be a little more honest, right? The Trump.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, let me tell you. Remember what Trump said about the Central Park Five, which by the way, was reprehensible and all.
Horrible.
But I feel like at least that's more honest. It's more just like, hey, this guy is more racist than we are, right?
Yeah,
and I think that's basically what we're gonna get. We're just getting a bunch of attack ads, and Biden's not going to say anything because he's afraid to say anything about policing, right? He actually probably understands that policing is not like the issue that is going to bring this home for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's not going to say anything about it. He's going to ignore all the progressives who are saying, oh, this is like a weak sauce thing. And he's just going to be like, hey, that other guy's super racist. And he's going to hope that leads to massive turnout. Maybe it will. I don't know. I don't want to be too much of a Debbie Downer here, but I kind of think it won't now. And it sucks because now I'm like, Jesus.
Totally.
What are we going to do if this dude wins again?
I just don't want to watch the. I mean, this is not.
What's the exit? What's our strategy here? Like, I don't know. And then
I just
it's
can't
like,
watch the news that much again. Is what I keep thinking about. Like, I just.
Yeah. Well, look, Tyler. Now that you're in the news making industry, I will say it's good for business for us. I would gladly trade bad business for 4 years for less stress in my life, but yeah, it is good. It's good for business. You're gonna be asked to do a lot more,
Oh God.
All right. The last thing I want to talk about all this is that what Trump has been doing, right? And Trump has been on this almost like how do we put it? It's like he's in a 1990s movie, right? That made by like a like a satirical movie made by the Wayans brothers or something like that, where he's like going to the Bronx, he's going to bodegas, he's going to cookouts, right? He's doing all these photo ops all throughout New York City, where obviously he has to be because of this trial. It's, I think for people like us who are terminally online and our brains are broken, that it's funny. Right. It's quite funny. Like, I don't know how many times a day one of my also terminally online media colleagues sends me a Trump photo and, as a way for us to just kind of laugh, I don't know. Do you think that Trump's a sort of approach to black voters or to minority voters is is actually helping his cause, or do you think it's just kind of like a sideshow that is, accompanying shifts in demographic voting?
Yeah, I mean, I think like and this is not my original theory, but I'm like one of these people that I think like an underpriced aspect of Trump's appeal is just that he's like legitimately like funny and charismatic, and that it like appeals, and he's like a showman, and Americans love showmen, and so yeah, I do. I mean, that Biden speech is boring as shit, and I think it was basically entertaining the coverage of the Trump Bronx thing, and they're like it's filled with a ton of characters. And I mean, one of the things, there was a really good thread that I thought was pretty interesting by a woman named Laura Jadid, who I think is a freelance journalist who writes for a number of places, and she was at the rally and did a kind of write up about it on Twitter. But one of the things she pointed out was it was like visibly very diverse, right? Like not diverse in the way that like minority majority or anything like that, but it was like a visibly diverse crowd with lots of black and brown people in it. And so do I think this is going to move the needle on Trump in New York? Of course not. New York's never going to go red. But do I think in general that I understand intuitively how he's trying to reach the black vote more than Biden? Yeah. I mean, it seems like, he's railing against, a system that has pretty much systematically screwed black people. And I think a lot of underemployed black men are, not feeling super charitable about like the state of play in American politics. And he is, seen as this outsider disruptive figure. And I think people like, fuck it, just burn it down. Who cares? Like, what's going to get better for me either way,
Do you feel like Biden reminding people in that moment that black employment rates are very high right now is useful? Like, do you think that's a corrective? Because I can't tell, because, in a debate sense, obviously, if this is just an abstract debate, that would be quite a good corrective, right? But in the real world, like, there's a question of whether or not it matters. I mean, is that the message you think that he should maybe? I'm not asking you because you're black and saying like, "Hey, Tyler, as a black."
So. Yeah, let me get out my Rolodex of black opinions.
Yeah, but
I keep them on me at all times.
Yeah, put on your black opinion hat right now, right?
Exactly.
And
they've taken my black opinion hat long time ago. They took it. They took my backup.
Put on your Philadelphia Eagles social justice hat, right?
Exactly.
With community awareness.
Dude, I'm gonna have to order one. I'm only gonna wear that on the show from now on.
Actually, you know what? I'm gonna order one for you so you can wear it on the show.
Please do. I definitely will.
Okay, so you tell me though.
Yeah, dude. I do think, I think that messaging helps some. I mean, I think that, the people who say the economy is good are like not wrong. Even as I think no one wants to talk about housing and all these other problems that are also a lens through which people judge the health of the economy or whatever. It is true that, black employment numbers have gone up. But I do think, and I think the polls bear this out, that like a lot of the phalanx of the people who are deflecting for Trump are underemployed black men. And it's not clear to me that things have gotten much markedly better for that particular demographic.
Right.
And so maybe it would help. But I don't know how much it would. I mean, it also just feels like we're in the middle of the early stages of a political realignment that is not so much just about I don't think the issue is Biden. Like I think plenty of black voters like Biden. I think he comes across as empathetic. I think you're right when we have those scenes where he's empathizing with people's pain, and he's really good in sort of, close-knit community work and stuff like that. Like I don't think it's really about Biden. I just think we're in the middle of a realignment in which a small but electorally significant percentage of minorities are peeling to the right. I don't think that has a lot to do with Biden. I think it's just about a broader exasperation with the Democratic Party. And I don't know how much that Biden can do that's going to fix that problem, because I don't think it's really about him, is my gut sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is like I don't think you can fix this with messaging and ads and pointing to policies or anything like that. I think that this is a shift in the public sentiment that is more along the lines of macroeconomics than anything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not something that you can kind of go in there and tweak a few things and fix. I think that any Democrat president would have been dealing with this. And I don't think it's because Biden is has been somehow forgetting the black community.
Yep.
I just think that the country is moving to the right in a pretty significant way, and that the right now just wants Trump, and that that'll shift at some point. But it also has to do with, amongst these minority populations, Latinos, Asians, right? A lot of the shift is that we now are in a different pattern of immigration for a lot of these voters. Like, they're middle class, they're upper middle class, right? Like, they're people who are going to have more conservative values based entirely on their economic standing, right? And what they think taxes are going to be like. And that
They're also
also
often
constitutes
religious.
part of
Yeah.
it too, right? Yeah. And, or religion, or like geographic, where they move to a place where there's a lot of Republicans around them and they become more conservative. As like, all these are things that happen when people get more, when a population of people, however you want to define them, if they become wealthier, they're going to become more conservative anyway. And so I don't think that these are things that Biden could have prevented. And I think that in some ways it's like actually wrong for him to chase this, right? Like, he actually maybe should just say the polls are wrong, even if the polls aren't wrong. And that maybe he should just go for, I want every single outraged white suburban voter who's mad about Dobbs and abortion rights to come out and vote. And I think that's kind of what they're going to do. Like, I think that this Morehouse speech was just like half-hearted effort.
Yeah.
I would be much more concerned if it wasn't that. I'll just put it that way. Because it wasn't great.
No. Yeah, I don't know, man. It was definitely not good. I think you're right. Like, I think I do find, like, maybe it's strategically good, I don't know, but I do find it like politically distasteful, the like sense to which the Democratic Party explicitly and implicitly signals to black folks that you have nowhere else to go. I saw a guy tweet today about, a slightly bigger account who tweeted about how, minorities are pissing in their own bowl of soup as a way to, like, frame these minorities who are moving to the right.
No. It was worse than that. He said that Latinos and Muslims are stupid, and that the only people who don't piss in their own soup are black. This is a white guy who said it, who are the black voters.
No, he said 9 out of 10.
Right. And it was the most like kind of like standard white guy wants to shit on other minorities, but he knows that if he says something nice about black voters, that he's gonna get away with
get a
that
pass.
type of thing. Yeah, I was like, no, I know that move. Like, I'm like I'm like Darrell Revis here for white people racism, for white people racism rationalizations, and like, you just ran the simplest route possible. Like, come on, like, we all know this. All right, so go ahead. Yeah.
No. I just, I do. Like, I don't think it's that surprising. Like, I think the Democratic Party has gotten more progressive. I think black folks have always been more moderate. It's not that surprising that some are peeling off as parties change. I mean, parties go through tons of iterations over the course of decades, and, issues come in and out of focus, and who they appeal to changes. And I think we're just in one of those moments. And I think it would be more productive for Democrats to figure out, like, what their messaging is and what the party stands for, other than being anti-Trump and, quote, democracy.
Right.
I don't know. I do, like, there is a phrase on the, like, crazy black right where they refer to the Democratic Party as the plantation, because, like, there's this assumption that no one can ever leave.
Right.
And that crowd
That's
is crazy.
Candace Owens' construction, right? Yeah.
And those people are nuts. But at the same time, like, the way you hear often white Democrats and party elites talk about black voters and talk about the polls, where they're like, well, what are the polls can't be right because the black people can't leave the Democratic Party, right? Like, that's the reigning logic. And I just find it really distasteful. And then it's doubly distasteful when people who are conceding, right? Like that guy who tweeted about pissing in the bowl of soup, he seems to be conceding that the polls might be right and that this realignment is happening. But then his explanation is that people are dumb, right? It's like these idiots.
It's more that, I mean, he's mostly was targeting Muslim voters, who, by the way, have not really like there's been no evidence that they're not going to show up and vote for Biden, by the way. It's just this guy's whining. And he's saying, like, oh, the sort of whatever the protests and this activist movement is going to take down the Democrat Party. Yeah, I don't know. There's really, the less said about that type of message, the better. It's pathetic. It's it's incurious. And I love when the people who say stuff like that yell at activists for like using bad message control or not really knowing how to communicate with people.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, when you say that, it really makes, like, that's the closest I'll ever be to voting for Trump. Just to fucking piss you off. That really the closest is when I hear shit like that. So keep it up,
Yeah.
like I have a vote, just keep saying, like, if you really, like, I'm never going to vote for Trump, but like, if you really wanted me to, the way to do it would be to just flood the zone with that type of messaging. Right.
Totally.
And so, whatever.
No,
Keep
I
it
think
up,
there's a lot
guys.
of people that are like, fuck you. Like, I don't, I'm losing either way.
Yeah, Candace Owens. That was Candace Owens' message always, right? We're losing either way, so why don't we try this other thing, right? I mean,
she's,
she had
like,
a lot of
crazier
other
now
really
also.
crazy, stupid messages, but the one that was coherent was that, right? That was a coherent message, and then everything else is like kind of like anti-Semitic or racist or weird or conspiratorial, like all the other crazy things, but like. That message, I don't know. Like, I understand why it has appeal. I disagree with it, but I understood the appeal of it at the time. All right. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Nah, dude. It's been fun.
What do you think about our YouTube experiment? How do you think it goes? Are you going to explain your guitars in the background? I've never asked you about it. What are all these guitars you have in the background? Are you in a band?
I play guitar. No, I just, I've played guitar since I was, a kid. I have a bunch. I don't play as much as I used to, maybe like half an hour a day if I'm lucky, but usually less. But ebbs and flows. Like, there have been times in my life I play a ton and other times I don't play very much. But yeah, no, I'm sure people will be scrutinizing all of my, like, zooming in to scrutinize what books I have on the shelf to confirm their suspicion.
I would be more worried about them scrutinizing your guitars.
Yeah.
What sort of things do you play on the guitar?
I play a lot of blues. I was really into sort of shred guitar and death metal when I was, a teenager in my early 20s. But yeah, now I mostly just play, blues and classic rock stuff and the Dead and shit like that.
Can you play classical gas?
No.
I watch these people play. Have you ever watched people on YouTube play classical gas? Do you know what I'm talking about? Classical gas. It's this guitar. It's like a classical guitar song that is very difficult to play, right? And there's a whole Simpsons bit about it or whatever. You should watch it. But
I will.
I do not know how to play the guitar at all. At some point, I asked on Twitter, I was like, how long would it take me to learn how to play this thing, from starting to zero? Some people are like, oh, if you really tried, it would take you a year and a half. I don't believe those people at all, right? And then some people are like, you will never be able to play it, which I kind of believe a little bit more. Not very musically talented.
Do you play any instruments, Jay?
Well, I know how to read music. I used to play sort of, It's like I read at a second grade level now. At some point I could sheet read music. It would be fine, but it's been many, many years. But yeah. I don't think I could play classical.
My kid really likes, like, I used to play drums, and my dad was a cop, and so I never knew when he was asleep because his shifts were always changing, right. And so, like, all the time I would start playing drums and he would be like asleep because it's like, he just got out of work. And so I was thinking about my kid was like banging on shit the other day, and I was like, I should get him one of those like baby drum sets. Maybe he'll grow up and want to play drums. And then I was like, that is a terrible idea.
So you've got like these drums. Yeah. Your kid is old enough now where you're starting to project shit on him.
Yeah.
It's 100%.
Fun. Yeah.
My advice to you as an older dad to a younger dad, Tyler, is don't deny yourself that shit.
Yeah.
It's fun. Just get him the fucking drum set. We have all sorts of shit from our first kid where I'm just like, whoa, she like showed 10 seconds of interest in something, and I was like, that's it. She's going to be a world champion chess player, for example, or something like that. And then you go buy some shit that just sits in your closet or whatever, but it's a nice memory. And if you have a second kid, then you'll realize how stupid you were being, and then you'll deprive the second kid of all of that type of stuff, and they don't have to like go through it. But the second kid will be much more chill as a result.
Yeah. Give it a try.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to the show, especially for our YouTube listeners who might be discovering this for the first time. This is a show that Tyler and I do every week. It's similar like this. We have a lot of guests, but the general idea of it is that it is a show about politics, culture a little bit, It is, our perspective is that we are both on the left, right? And that neither of us are white. And that doesn't limit the conversations that we have, but it certainly colors them, I would say, right? Is that fair? Do you think that's a fair way to
It
put
colors
Yeah.
them for sure. Colored Conversations with Jay and Tyler.
That should be the name. Colored Conversation. You know what? That's not a bad idea. It would be quite. It would
It makes some
attract
people mad.
it would attract the right type of controversy, I think. Right.
Yeah.
But the thing we say at the end of every show is that it does take quite a bit of effort to put the show out. And so if you would like to support us so we can keep doing it, you can go to patreon.com/ttsgpod, or you can go to goodbye.substack.com. Until next week, Tyler, I will talk to you then.
Cheers, man.
All right. Bye.